One. All right. Hi, Monty. And thank you so much for being with me here today. I'm sure you're quite busy teaching full time while promoting your book. So let's get to it. In the preface of your book here, you start by saying, this is not a book of answers. It's a book of betters. Eventually, you describe this cycle of do, reflect, do better. How is this different from your approach prior to this journey that you're writing about?
Well, that's a good question, Alfredo. And as I've thought about it, I don't think much has changed in terms of my being a reflective person who's always, quote, challenged the status quo. So in that regard, I don't think it's all that different. But I do think there is a big difference, and I think that big difference is when I decided to kind of take a step, that initial step, what I think is a really big step away from tradition. I found myself free, and finally at a place. And I think what I mean by free there is like, yes, I was still teaching. Yes, I still had to, tend to the daily requirements of my job, my contractual obligations, everything else. But I'd finally had enough. And I said, I'm going to do this. And that created the freedom I think that was necessary for me to put up or shut up.
Right.
And I decided to put up, and that's really what helped kind of get Project 180 going in the first place. And I think it's what helped sustain it. I did not expect to find better, though, when I first started Project 180.
Mhm.
I expected to turn education upside down so I could return it right side up. And as I put on the back cover of the book, but what really the only thing that turned up was what was in front of me all along, and that was better. And so instead of finding the answer, instead of finding, good or, finally putting a name to bad, all that I was really finding was my own better. And if I were going to change education, I had to find it within, as I continued to quote, fight that which was without. And that's really where the do, reflect, do better. At times I've wondered, like, is this just a convenient rationalization, for my wandering around out here?
Yeah.
But I came to understand, through my work and through my daily reflections, that it's not a rationalization. It's a reasoned reflection. I have questions about our work, and I've always had questions about our work. And now that I was free from tradition, I could freely ask those questions. But again, I then had the responsibility to try to come up with answers. And all I was finding was one better at a time. I initially thought this was going to be a 2-year project. Bam, I'm going to turn it upside down. I'm going to do daily reflections. I'm
Right.
going to
In and
challenge
out.
the world. And then I'm going to come back and give everybody the results. And we're going to have fixed education. And that's just not how it happened. And I'm so glad that's not how it happened. And I think that's not how it is going to happen as you and I and the rest of the world continue to push convention and challenge tradition. I just think we just have to focus on getting better individually and collectively and institutionally. So that's where do, reflect, do better came from.
Yeah, well, my favorite thing about your book is it's not preachy. It's not here's what you need to do.
Yeah.
Here's like a checklist. It's an invitation to talk about and kind of see what you've been doing and the results you've had, and an invitation to do better, which I've taken up on and inspired by. And we'll talk a little bit about your social media, but I got to say, when you feel super comfortable in the space you're holding with these young people, you almost can't help but do better, and then they do better. It's just so positive. Good stuff. And speaking of your book again, you talk about your original focus being motivation, right? How do I motivate these quote unquote unmotivated young people? And I appreciate that you separate academic motivation from engaging in the classroom with you or the other people in the room. What, in your opinion, are educators missing in regards to that academic motivation piece?
I think I think what we've been missing is is just simply, the opposite of what we've been doing. And I think what we've been doing for too long, Alfredo, is that we believe that we can comply kids, along and use that. I mean, I talk in the book quite a bit about, the grade game, and I talk about the carrot and the stick and the rewards and punishments that we use with grades. And I think that, we've done it for so long, we don't know how to do it differently. And I think when things get tough as they do, even this far removed from where I first began, where I no longer, and I vow publicly never to use grades as carrots and sticks again. I still feel those old tuggings at time, and it
Yeah.
just is mind-boggling to me that I had been in that place for so long that I still hear or feel traces of it, and ghosts from that past still haunt me, and I get tugged back to there. It's like, damn, this kid's not doing this. Okay, well, you're not gonna, then I find myself and I catch myself. It's like, you're not gonna what, right? Like, you're not
Yeah.
gonna pass my class, and I fall back into that. So I think then, if it's not compliance, what is it? I believe in my journey through Project 180, it has to be about commitment. And I talk quite a bit in different places about the difference between compliance and commitment. And when I took that first big bold step, as I did, giving all kids an A for the year in year one, all that was left was commitment, because there was nothing I could hold over my kids, if you will. And so I think, to get back to your question, it's not about something that we do to kids. I think it's about something that we bring out of our kids and we help them discover on their own. And so that's why I am so committed to commitment, because I think that that's where the only true motivation lies, and that's within each kid. And easier said than done, right? I mean, I'm still wondering and worrying about, like, what do I do with these kiddos who aren't doing anything,
Yeah.
and it's going to be the EverQuest, I think. But I think it lies somewhere in the realm of commitment and not compliance.
Yeah. And if they show up on a day, they clearly did not bring commitment that day,
Yeah,
right? It's not that doesn't mean that they're not going to show up tomorrow with commitment, or a check-in, a real personal moment isn't going to, have them say, all right, I didn't show up today, but I can try to show up tomorrow,
yeah,
or I don't want to be super radical here, but maybe you check in and say, hey, what's preventing you from being more committed today, as
yeah,
opposed to just making some real assumption, or
yeah,
doing all of the things that people do, kick them out of class, or assume that they're just, they don't
yeah,
like you, or something weird like that. It's the kinds of questions I ask students now, because with a lot of influence from you, because I think you ask really pertinent questions, uh, has changed dramatically. And because of that, I'm getting better information, having better relationships with these students. And I just want for people hearing, like, check out your Twitter with some of these things you post
yeah,
daily, because I think just the act of asking some of these questions is transformational over
yeah,
over
yeah.
time.
I hope so. I hope so.
Your website is let'schangeeducation.com. You're a public high school teacher like me. You teach English, and your students spend every school day with a teacher who looks at grading differently than most teachers do. Can we go back to the beginning of the change in your approach to grading? Like, what was the final straw to make you move towards different and then eventually better?
Yeah, that's a day. I don't remember the exact day, but it was that first year after I had begun, um, uh, my blog, which was, a product of our independent learning projects, because I do those with my kids. And my first one was to come up with a blog, and that was kind of a dare by one of my kiddos. And so that's what started the blog. Um, and then we continued with the independent learning projects after that. And as I started asking questions about motivation, as I started asking questions about grading, and as we continue to work through these independent learning projects, and these are pre-AP kids, these are honors kids, right?
Okay.
Um, and here we are working through these independent learning projects, and I want the kids to just focus on making some choices and pursuing their own interests and passions and things with their projects, and all that most of them are worried about are their darned
How
grades.
many points is this
Yeah,
worth?
how many points? It's just like they want to know, like, what's the minimum I have to do or what's the maximum I have to do.
Right.
And it was driving me nuts, and that is not to say, Alfredo, that was the first time that I experienced that. I had experienced that for 20 years, but like as you said, the final straw, I finally decided, you know what? The kids have to take ownership of their learning. And as long as I'm holding grades over their heads, even giving them something as free as, I mean, even telling them, like, guys, you're going to get an A on this. There's no way you're
Yeah.
not going to get an A. I just want you to do what you want to do. And I want you to choose your own path. And I want you to rely less on me. Um, and then that couldn't give them the liberty that I wanted to provide for them. And so that for me was a tipping point and really got me to start thinking about, okay, what major change am I going to make, with grading? And that's when I finally decided that next year to take that bold first step and take grades completely off the table by giving my kids all an A for the year, because it's like, okay, you have an A now, kiddo, and we have 180 days. What are we going to do? And the
Right.
focus became about learning and commitment and growing themselves, which is what I think this all should be about
Yeah.
anyway.
Yeah. We've taken this dance off the table.
Yes.
So
Yes.
so now let's just interact here.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah.
Let's uh I suspect you get plenty of pushback on this approach. And my intent was to spend some of our time together playing devil's advocate, so you could respond to some common objections to your approach. But I don't need to do that, do I? Because on the section of your website that you call the Disruptor series, you post 7 objections to your approach. And I'm not going to get into all 7 because I really want people to visit let'schangeeducation.com and on their own. But I did speak with 2 of my classes today, and I showed them the 7 objections.
Nice.
And I asked one AP class of juniors and one non-AP class of sophomores. I said, if our school was going to pick one of these and make a change, let's talk about which one would be most important to you guys and really help you guys the most. Do you have any guess from a student perspective which of those 7 they chose?
If I had to guess, I'd say something probably along the lines of either accepting late work or allowing retakes
It
or
was
something
late work.
along the
It
line.
was
Okay.
both classes, 10th grade non-AP and AP juniors, both classes said late work for full credit.
Yes.
And we had some really productive conversations about that. I take late work for full credit, but my 2 things are, I'm only going to take it during these pre-established windows because my brain will be in, okay, have the grade book open and I'll take it. And so that's our big our thing. And so, yeah, they said late work for full credit, and we had some good conversations about that. So, good stuff there. That only beat their second ranked idea, which was 50% for a missing assignment.
Yeah.
They thought that would really not stress them out, and they use the phrase that you've used, is this hole that they can't climb out of.
Yeah.
Once they get that feeling, it's really hard for them to keep going. I don't want to give away the whole book, but I do want to talk about my favorite part, which was at the end of the first semester you tried this, you had some doubt, and ultimately you surveyed students and parents to essentially have them commit all over again to these new approaches, or they could choose to be in your class and have more traditional
Yep.
grading for the second semester. How did you manage that second semester with, a couple of kids on a more traditional system?
Well, to begin, after I made that, um, tough decision, as I talk about in the book, to really pause for a moment and give my parents and my students an opportunity to make a choice. I found myself in a far less anxious place for the rest of the year. And this is why, Alfredo, because I found myself in a place because I had begun to worry deeply and earnestly about like, what have I done to my kids, right? Like,
Mhm.
have I made the right decision here? I mean, I made a radical first step. I did not consult them. They showed up the first day and I said, hey, this is
That's
how
fair.
things are going to be, you know, and um, and there were a lot of growing pains as we went through that first semester. And so I decided I had to do the right thing, the better thing, and give my families and my students an opportunity to make a choice. Fortunately, the majority of them, I think all but two, decided to stay with the keeping the A for the entire year, and two wanted to go traditionally. And it was far less anxious for me because I had allowed them to commit. I'd allowed them to make a choice, and if there's no choice, there's no commitment. And so, for those of us who chose to stay with the A for the entire year, I felt like there was a renewed commitment on my kids' part, because they indeed had gotten to make a choice for the rest of the year, and I think that was something that made a huge difference in terms of their engaging the work and doing the work more diligently. For the few who decided to stay traditional, it really wasn't that big of a deal. I just
Okay.
had to make a few tweaks here and there to my grade book. I had them actually keep their own grade book, and we just reported things a little differently to mom and dad. It really, as far as I was concerned, is like whatever I have to do to support my kids, I am going to do to support my kids because they didn't have a choice in this. This is pretty. This is a pretty major step. This is foreign to them. I'm the one who made the change. I have to bear the responsibility of the work if there's going to be additional work, and it worked out very well for the rest of the year.
Well, I'll tell you, because I teach juniors and sophomores, by the time they get to me, or the time to get to this high school level, especially some of these more academically aggressive kids, they're very conditioned
Oh
to
boy.
certain things.
Oh yeah.
And it didn't hit me until, so we had finals this week.
Mm-hmm.
And last week was my window that I accept late work. And students were uh, presenting late work or even forgetting that I take it and it's full credit and asking, is this for full credit? Are you sure you're going to take this? It just wasn't registering with them that it's all good. I'd rather you do it sincerely and turn it
Yes.
in late than
Yes.
copy it and throw it at me,
Absolutely.
check off some box. Uh, but you could almost see that they were in a stressful space because
Yes.
finals was this week and they weren't discerning between teachers. When they saw
Yes.
me, they didn't see Mr. Silva. They saw
Yep.
teacher and whatever their version of teacher is. And it was a different energy than I was used to with some of these kids because they were in that points grabbing mode. And
Yes.
if
Yes.
you're one of six teachers who's a little looser on the grading, uh, they get in that mode.
Yep.
It was an experience. It was the
Yeah.
first
Yeah.
time I'd seen that from this group, and it's like, oh, hey, wow, you're in a space.
Yes.
Okay, so speaking of skeptics, I have some practical questions here, and
Okay.
some of these are from my colleagues who are really trying to implement
Awesome.
this and enroll some people. All right. You do collaborative performance-based projects in your class, is that right?
That's partially right. I think
Okay.
we do projects, but we also do our fair share of like, we're moving through this unit. These are our standards, and so there's some traditional stuff there too, which I think is a necessary blend of the two. Particularly here in Washington State, where I teach 10th grade, and we have the state assessment at the end of the year. So I can't just simply throw all of that out there in
Right.
a way. I do more project-based learning with my juniors and seniors, but with my sophomores, it's not probably all that different from what
Okay.
most of my colleagues are doing. So
Okay. All
my
right.
grading is just different, and my approach is different. But
Got it. So you don't throw, to be clear for people listening, you don't throw everything out and just
I do
teach
not.
whatever's on a whim
No,
every
no.
day.
We don't
Good.
we don't
Okay.
sit around and play the guitar and burn incense.
All
So
right. I just want to
okay,
make
all
that
right,
clear
okay.
there. Good. Because that was a concern that was raised. Well, what are you doing there then? All right. So, but let's say you are in a project mode and you're in the middle of it. You're like on day 3
Yep.
of 6 days. Like, what does your class look like? Right.
Yep.
You're okay. So you're not burning incense and playing the guitar
Right.
and doing yoga. Well, what does it look like? Is it messy? Or kids listening to music and
It
ignoring
is.
you? Is it like an 80s movie where there's paper airplanes going around and stuff?
I
Because they're
know.
going to get an A anyway, right, Monty?
Well, yeah, they're not going to fail, right? So
Okay.
they may not get an A, but they're not going to fail. And so
Okay.
I think a lot of people wonder at times, like, okay, if kids know they're not going to fail, how are you getting them to engage in the work then? Because, you know, I think a lot of times the assumption is, well, if you take away the F, they're just not going to do anything.
Hmm.
Or if we want to go back to year 1, if you give them an A, they're not going to do anything. That has not been my experience at all
Mine either. Yeah.
on either end of that, Alfredo. And so I if you were to look at my classroom, I think you would see a classroom like most other classrooms. But I think what you would also observe is that we're just meeting in our learning. We're just focusing on learning. We're not worried about our grades. And I know that sounds overly simple that we're just meeting in our learning. The kids know the path ahead. The kids know that there aren't going to be any major pitfalls for them to come into harm or that are going to hurt them from succeeding. And we just meet in our learning. That's our work. The kids know that where we're trying to get is to that place where we can engage in the feedback response process, and that's where you will see most of our work on a daily basis. Is I am responding to kids' work, helping them grow forward. I don't know what else my job would be if it's not that. You would see a classroom where Syrie doesn't talk a whole lot to the entire class. When I'm talking to the entire class, we're talking about each other. We're talking about our community. When we're in our work, each of us, I'm with each of my kids, meeting them where they are, helping them grow forward in the feedback response process. And I know that sounds again highly idealistic, perhaps. Do all kids do well work all the time? Absolutely not. I haven't
Right.
managed a miracle here, but I think what I have done is I've simply managed to make it more clear to kids that we're just here to learn. We're just here to move forward, and I'm here to serve and support you. And I think that frames the whole experience differently for kids.
Yeah, I think what people hear, which is totally not the case, but when you say you're going to do a different approach, I think people hear you saying that you're going to do less. And so they think, well, how are kids going to do more if the teacher's doing less? We're not doing less, we're doing different.
We're
And
doing different.
but it's not less. And so
Yeah.
I just want to dispel that image for people who think, oh, well, if if you're changing grading, then what's going on in there? There's plenty going on,
There's
people.
plenty going on in there, and for me, what it's created is it's created a situation where my teaching is responsive, and that's the whole place. That's where I want to arrive with my kids. It's not teaching is not talking at kids, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Teaching is responding to where they are in their learning, and I may not do a lot with grading, but I do a whole heck of a lot with giving feedback, because that's the hardest work we do, but it's also the most meaningful work we do. And that's that sweet spot that I try to create in my classroom, because I think that's where learning happens.
And for AP teachers out there or honors teachers out there at these really high pressure schools, what I'm realizing for my students is they're used to having this event that is going to take place at some point.
Yep.
And this feeling of, if you don't do well on blank, then you might as well not have done anything at all, because your grade is going to reflect as if you didn't do anything.
Yep.
And so there's, as that event, in this case, it was finals week this week, they were going into 5 other classes, not mine, 5 other classes, where it was, if I don't do well in this moment, I might as well have not shown up all year.
Yep.
And I cannot imagine that kind of,
nope,
or doing that to these kids. Well, let's talk about F's then, because you said, that kids have varying degrees of success. Have you ever given a student a failing grade? Have you given one recently?
So early in my career, absolutely, I failed kids. I thought that's what we were supposed to do, right? Like we were the guards at the gate, and if they hadn't, you know, met my arbitrary standards, I'm being a
Right.
little
That
snarky
you
there.
made up.
My made up grades, then they deserve to fail, And so yeah, for years, Alfredo, I failed kids, but it didn't always sit right with me, right? Particularly since I knew that our grades were primarily made up, that no one had really trained me on how to grade. Um, and so at some point in my career, I finally, being the reflective person that I am, um, I started to wonder maybe if it's not I who was failing the kid.
Mhm.
Like maybe I wasn't able to provide all the support or the situation or the environment that they needed to succeed. And so maybe it's I who failed. And so at that moment, I decided I was going to quit failing kids, and I have not failed a kid in over 10 years.
Wow.
I refuse to put an F on a transcript. The only way I will put an F on a transcript is my principal comes down and says, "Hey, you have to fail this kid," and we all
Right.
know that is not going to happen.
So back to the practical piece though, do you do things like give an incomplete or
Nope,
you just
nope.
okay.
Nope. The lowest grade. So my kid, we do select and support grading. The kids can select A, B, or C. And if they haven't done anything, by default they get a D. They still get credit. They've been in the class. But I refuse to put an F on a transcript until we get our own house together, meaning education, because I think we fail kids all the time. They don't
I,
fail us.
I stole a phrase from a teacher. I've been in the classroom over 20 years. I stole a phrase from a teacher from when I first started, and he said, "I don't give Fs." He said, "A student will practically have to fight me to get
Yeah,
an F,
yeah.
right? But I'm just gonna be on him and on him and on him, and it's yeah, it's a I have similar approaches here to that concept of well, where does really the responsibility lie? I want to share with you that I spoke to my classes about one other thing today, and it's a question you posted on Twitter. And for people listening, this guy's Twitter account is amazing because of the questions that he asks. Right, you're asking a lot of really great questions, and the question you posted recently was pretend your district or state had to get rid of one of the following grades, A, B, C, D, F.
Correct.
Which one would it be and why? And so I asked my students this, two periods, an AP juniors and a non-AP sophomores. And overwhelmingly, they said D. They were like, what, what are you really telling me if you tell me I have a D? It's not motivating me either way. Some of them cop to the fact that, yeah, we know some people that, you know, uh, know that they have an F because they don't actually do anything,
Yes.
or the teacher allows them to not do anything without really intervening. But they said we just don't understand the D's overwhelmingly, and I thought that was an interesting place for them to get to. And they also overwhelmingly saw full credit for late work as a major improvement to consider. So then does your grade book look like everyone else's? This was a concern with some teachers I was talking to recently. Like when they're doing projects or they're not giving daily worksheets,
Yep.
right? Then their grade book, especially like first 5 weeks, their grade book's kind of thin.
Yeah.
And if they're honors or AP parents, they're checking that thing, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So,
Yep.
I mean, does your grade book look like everyone else's, or
Nope. It doesn't. I don't even call it my grade book.
okay?
I call it a record of learning. That's and that's the language I try to use. We're just keeping record of your learning, and I do not grade practice. And so the only thing I put in the grade book or my record of learning are kids' assessments, and I call them learning checks. And I enter one of three scores. I either enter a 0.6, which is an invitation to complete because it's incomplete,
Okay.
a 0.7, which is an invitation to improve. And if there's a 0.7 there, that means that there's also feedback that is been given back to the kiddo, with direction on how to improve. So it's an invitation to improve, and then a 1 is done. If it's a 1, it's done. They have met the expectations for that particular learning check. And so that's what I communicate to my parents too. It's just like, next year, or when I send out progress reports to my parents, is like, I send it out with the message like, your kiddo has an opportunity to improve. I even call it like opportunity to improve. That's the tagline in the message that I send.
Uh-huh.
And then I communicate to them. It's like, if you see a 0.6, parents, that means it's not turned in yet, so your kiddo needs to get this into me so I can join them in their learning, because until they do it, I can't give them any feedback.
Right.
And that's the whole purpose of our doing work in the first place. If it's a 0.7, that means they have submitted it and I have returned it with feedback. And there is an open invitation, Alfredo, for kids to always either submit work or improve work. And then my kids know if I say it's a 1, they repeat back, it's done. So just a simple rhyme there. Are there fewer assignments in my gradebook? Absolutely. I don't need a ton of assignments in my gradebook. Much of our time is spent practicing. And that is not something that I'm going to grade. That is not something that I'm going to report on. That is something that serves a primary purpose of helping kids prepare for their performances. What I have found is that kids begin to recognize or realize, like, oh, wait a minute, Sai is giving us this practice because if I do this practice, it's helping me set up for the performance. And so early on, I'll have a number of kids who like, oh, he's not grading the practice, so I'm not going to do the practice. They start to realize that there is value in doing the practice. And that's what I want. That's where I want them to be, is like, I want them to find value in the practice because they see that it helps support them on the performances. So that's what my grade book looks like.
Yeah. And I think teachers are sort of, or adults who have an issue with some of this are kind of telling on themselves when they say things like, well, why would they do it if there's no grade for it? It's like, well, if you're asking engaging questions, giving engaging assignments, and because what everything you do sounds so aligned, right? And because it's aligned, the practice is just another step along the way. But
Yes.
where you're going is very clear to everyone. So
Yep.
it's a step you got to take along the way. And I mean, I'm a former athletics coach, and parents have never questioned, why do you have practice, or asked for a daily update on how practice went today. It's well, we're getting ready for this deal over here, and then you'll see how practice went by how we do on Friday or whatever. And so it would be great to have some people stop clutching so much to going on to their digital grade book and looking for evidence of activity.
And what are they really able to discern from our traditional grade books anyway?
I could throw some grades in there.
Yeah, like, oh, wow, they're really working hard because I have 40 grades in the grade book. For me, Alfredo, I would much rather, if a parent is concerned, please call me or come in and see me, and let's sit down and let's talk about like what we're doing and why we're doing it. Because I'm going to be able to give them far more information in that discussion than they're just passively looking at my online gradebook, making assumptions, about the arbitrary point system that I have come up with and put into a database, So,
and what I would imagine, and I'm so grateful to be able to tell you this digitally. I was going to say face to face, but is the reason why I would love to have my kid be in your class any day is because if I did call you with a concern, I think the conversation would be very personal. Like you would say things about my kid that you could only know if you actually genuinely interacted with them.
Yeah, and like, hey, Carter's going to PBR this weekend with you guys. That's awesome. That's a pro bull riding thing that's happening here in Spokane this weekend. And I mean, I could tell you something about each of my kids, and I have a personalized conversation with parents because I know their kids.
Right, and that's always. As a parent, I've been to parent-teacher conferences for my kids where it was obviously just a very generic boom, boom, boom. And when you sit there and have an adult talk about your kid and you're like, yeah, you really know them because everything you're saying is spot on, the good and the bad, right? Yeah. that's, you feel like, man, they're in a great place. And so for people, teachers listening or parents listening, there's a lot of power there. And that's the kind of things that stick with the kid, that personal investment. But you then have to be vulnerable too. And so your Twitter account is full of vulnerable daily questions that you pose to your students, right? Actually, some days they're just these statements, right? How do these daily conversation starters fit into your overall approach? I mean, shouldn't you be teaching content?
Yeah. So, wow, I have so much to say about this, but I'll
Right,
try.
right. Okay.
So, for one, this is how it fits, and this is also going to answer the content question, Alfredo. Um, I tell my kids on day one, there's nothing more important. We're going to learn a lot of important things this year, but of all the things that we're going to learn, there's nothing more important than the people in the room. I tell my kids this on day one. I want them to know that I'm not full of crap, that when I say that, I mean that. And so when I commit to that, that means we are going to start with the people in the room every single day. I know it's not on your question, the questions that you have for me, but my day always starts with smiles and frowns. That's our daily check-in. And so from there, it's a pretty easy slide into let's talk about something that is meaningful to your lives, things that give you an opportunity to have a voice in our school. I mean, like the question we're asking, like, which of the 5 grades should we get rid of? Why shouldn't kids be able to participate in that discussion? I mean, after all, that has been the bulk of their experience. I mean, everything hinges upon their grades. And why shouldn't we want to invite them to talk about such things? And I think when we talk to kids like that, they feel like we see them as thinking, breathing, living human beings who have something to say about the work that we engage in on a daily basis. What content is more important than our kids' lives? So when people say, shouldn't you be teaching content? I am teaching content.
Yeah.
I teach kids, and that is where we begin. People first, the content will wait. And what content are we talking about? Are we talking about the content that I never get to because the time runs out too quickly? Whose content, what content, there is nothing more important than kids, and I will always start with kids. And having those types of conversations, as you can probably imagine and know because you have conversations with your kids, it changes the entire dynamic in the classroom.
Another small practical questions. You brought up smiles and frowns, and I think people should go to your blog and your Twitter account to look at smiles and frowns as a starter. How long does it actually take once you really get rolling? How long does smiles and frowns take out of your class period?
So confessional, right? I said once upon a blog that it takes 5 to 10 minutes, right?
Right. Okay.
And that's a fair range, I think. But if I'm being honest, and if it's a really participative or a class that participates a lot, it could take anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes.
Okay.
I am willing to give that time. I am willing to give that time for a time. I fretted over it. It's like, okay, this is taking away from instructional time. But I have found, I mean, think about all the instructional time we waste anyway.
Right.
Kids looking up at the door last 5 minutes, this, that, and the other thing. And then, it's just like, okay, I can get away from that. I can take time away from that, and we can really focus on the kids in the room. So if I had to give a rough average, Alfredo, I would say it takes 10 minutes. If it takes longer than that, it takes longer than that. Some days it takes less than that. It doesn't matter to me. I that ship has sailed for me. This is the most important thing we do. Is I have made public. This is the hill that I will die on. If I ever have an administrator who says, "Hey, you can't be doing smiles and frowns every day because it's taking too much time," I'm going to start looking for another job.
So if you're being observed,
yep.
Do you start with smiles and frowns?
Not only do we start with smiles and frowns, the observer participates in the smiles and frowns, because kind of the rule is if you're in the room, you participate. You still have the right to pass like the kids do, but you are in the room. We're not going to think that you're just some foreign extension. You're going to sit down with us and you're going to participate, in smiles and frowns. And every time administrators come in, they participate in smiles and frowns.
It's a community for an hour a day, 5 days a week, 180. It's a community. You're here where there's going to be interaction.
Yes. Well,
And
and don't talk about SEL, right? And
right,
its importance, and then beat up a teacher because they're spending time talking to their kids.
right, right.
You know,
But honestly, you were there before
yes,
the recent SEL
yes.
push. You were there before, and you really need to be, commended for that. And
Well, thank you.
I don't want people to dismiss all of this as SEL. It's real teaching, as
Yes,
opposed to transactional
yes, yes.
teaching. So, for the record, what strikes me the most about your daily conversations is that you're asking the students about themselves, right? Your book made me ask myself, man, how often do I ask my students about themselves? And the answer, sadly, was very little. I had convinced myself that asking them vague questions, such as, hey, are you good? Or do you need more time on that? Was the same as checking in. But those moments and exchanges are transactional. I'm really asking for an update on their progress with the task that I had assigned them. But I'm not asking them about them. And I believe listening is an act of love, okay? And that your students feel heard and therefore respected and therefore comfortable, and can then, as a result, try harder because they can focus, because they're not distracted by the stress or the feelings of not being connected.
Yes.
And I think that there's a lot of wisdom and power in that. And I just think we can all at least consider implementing some of these things
Yeah.
that you're doing. Plenty of teachers want to change, but are in the minorities, are in the minority of teachers who are looking to change at their school site or at their department. Where does one get the courage to push for change like this? Can anyone do it, or do you just happen to have thick skin and and tenure and a supportive administration?
Yeah, wow, that's isn't that the $1 million question, Alfredo? Um, so one, I don't have thick skin. I'm rather a sponge, and I let
Nice.
things bother me more than they should. Um, but I do think that there is some courage there. But I think courage needs a how do I say this? Courage needs an implement, right? And I would like to think that the implement that I would like to urge the world to use is do reflect, do better, because that was the only thing that I found that was able to sustain the courage necessary to take the, if you will, crazy steps that I continued to take and still continue to take, because this is what I know. Um, if you're my principal and you catch wind of what I'm doing, and it's outside the realm of convention and tradition, I would hope that you would give me the opportunity to explain my why,
Mhm.
and to give me the opportunity to succeed, not to fail, but to succeed, and and to know that I am ever striving to be better at this new thing that I'm doing, because I see its value and its worth in impacting and making better the education that I and the experience that I'm trying to provide for my kiddos. And so I talk in the book about trading my sword for my walking stick, right?
Yeah, I love that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was a fighter for too many years, Alfredo, and I thought that's who I had to be. I'd rattle my saber and call all sorts of attention to myself, right? As many of us have. But there are also those of us who don't want to rattle their sabers, and that doesn't mean that they don't have things that they want to pursue and things that they want to try differently. And I do think that there's a level of courage that is necessary for folks to be able to do that. And I would like to hope that if they could see the value in just being humble and being honest about, hey, here's an edge that I want to work on, all right, that I see that is getting in the way of my providing the best experience I can for my kids. Please support me in this. This is why I'm doing it. And my promises to you is that as I am doing it, I'm going to be really reflective about it. And I am just going to try to do better each and every single day. How could somebody not feel empowered by the opportunity to do that? How could an administrator not feel compelled to want to support that teacher in his, her, or their journey into trying to provide? Because come on, we don't have it all figured out, right? We know this.
And not everyone's trying to do better. I can't imagine every member of that staff is looking him in the eye saying, I am sincerely trying to do better.
Yeah.
And I would appreciate your support. Most teachers are very isolated and almost secretive about what in fact they are doing,
Yes.
And so
Yes.
I gotta believe an administrator would back something like that. And you have focused on that part better, which I appreciate, because plenty of people will do reflect, but then the third thing is criticize, right? Do reflect, criticize, do reflect, complain, right? And complaining and criticizing is has short-term, returns.
Yeah.
But if you do reflect and do better, and, other teachers might say, hey, well, the kids really seem to like you. Is it just your personality? I mean, that's another sort of, does this come down to personality?
I don't know. I'm not sure.
Can an introvert pull this off?
I am an introvert.
Okay, good.
Yeah, wholeheartedly.
Good to know.
And I talk
introverts out there, good to know.
Yeah, and I talk about that all the time with my kids. I'm writing an essay with them right now, and one of my core traits is introversion, and I talk to my kids about that, and it's a surprise to them because I'm not that way in the classroom. And I think my introverts who are in the class appreciate that, that I'm willing to share that so honestly and openly. I think we can do that and be that. And, I just, can I read something from the book
Of
that
course.
kind of speaks to this a little bit? And so this is from the introduction with Better Begins. And this is where I'm talking about, our need to kind of, fight the fight, if you will. There will always be things outside our rooms that we cannot control. I am not going to win the battle against the new program that the district has spent tens of thousands of dollars on. Oh, I can rattle my saber a bit, but it's not a battle I'm going to win. Oh, I can, but importantly, wait, sorry. I lost my space there. I have learned that, but importantly, I've also learned that while I cannot control what's outside, I have a great deal of control over what's inside myself and my classroom. Admittedly, I still feel the rise in my resistance when outside forces come knocking. I'm still a fighter, but I am no longer available for the battle between good and evil. I am committed to the better battle, the journey within. I have traded my sword for a walking stick and engaged in the work that really matters better. And as I think about that first year where I decided to ditch learning, I kind of had gotten to that point where you're just talking about, I had done a lot of doing and reflecting and a lot of criticizing and complaining and passing the buck. And I finally got to that place after 20 years, Alfredo, where I said, I'm not going to pass the buck any longer. I can either complain about it or I can get busy fixing it. And so that's when I decided to take grades off the table in order to discover how can we make this a more meaningful, relevant experience for us and our kids. Because for 20 years, I had not been feeling like that. And I feel better about education than I have ever felt.
Awesome.
Because I know that when I show up every day, the worst that's going to happen is better. And my kids know the same thing. If you ask them on an assessment, what's the worst thing that's going to happen on an assessment in Syrie's class, they will answer better, because that's the only thing that can happen for all of us. And I believe that earnestly. And so for those of us, or those of you out there who are ready to dare a different or brave a better, know your why, implement, do, reflect, do better, and go chase those things that you've always been wanting. Because I think there are things that we all know, those unconventional ideas that we're afraid to try because we're afraid that they're wrong. Don't worry about the wrong or the right. Just worry about making it better and know why you're going to make it better. Knowing your why disarms people. So when people come knocking, know your why and just be humble about, I am just simply and only trying to get and be better. That would be my message to those who want to change.
Yeah, and that should be plenty. And so, to be clear, the book is not a list of strategies,
Not at all.
and that the kids are going to stand up and say, "Oh, Captain, my Captain," at the end of the year, or carry off on on their shoulders.
Yep.
But they'll certainly remember the questions you asked.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And
I hope so.
Yeah. Well, everyone gets the same final question. I could talk to you all day, man. I really appreciate your time. But everyone gets the same final question. And someday I'll compile them all and reflect on those. But Monte, what does it mean to you to teach for justice?
I think I have a short, simple answer to that, Alfredo, and I think it's teach each. Teach each kid. Each is not all. And we can't get to all until we get through each. And so if we can get to each kid, maybe someday we can start talking about all kids. And I know no other way to serve and support kids than just to meet each where they are, because as we know, all of them are in different places. And the sooner we honor that, I think the sooner we do the just thing.
Awesome. Awesome. I really appreciate this time. The book is Better, A Teacher's Journey, Project 180, Book 1. I got my own hard copy here. I got my Kindle copy on Amazon also, and I highly recommend people to pick it up. Thanks for your time, man. I fully hope that people find it and start asking themselves some of these really great questions, and then start asking their students and try it. Just all I'm saying is try it. And honestly, if
is better.
I'm trying, and all that's happening is better. So thank you, man. I appreciate it. I will see you soon.
Okay.